Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Ministry of Finance Learning Week Day 3 is about to begin. But before that, let me take a moment to review a few technical details. Today's webinar will be conducted in English. However, it comes with English-Indonesian simultaneous interpretation. To listen to the translation, click the globe icon or three dots icon, select interpretation, and choose English-Indonesian accordingly. It is advised that you do not click the mute original audio, but should you wish to do so, to obtain a clearer audio rendition, please make sure to manually switch off the interpretation when someone in the floor is speaking in the language that you are listening into. This webinar is also available on our YouTube channel, BPPK Kemenkeu RI. That's all the information. Let us now begin. The Ministry of Finance Learning Week, Day 3, Learning How to Learn. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to the Ministry of Finance Learning Week, Day 3, Learning How to Learn. I'm Pilar Wirotama, your host for today. First of all, I would like to thank God the Almighty that has given us blessing to virtually attend this webinar. And I would like to extend a very warm welcome to the Chairman of Financial Education and Training Agency, Bapak Andin Hadianto, the Secretary of Financial Education and Training Agency, Bapak Iqbal Islami, senior official from the Ministry of Finance and other ministries or agencies of Indonesia, and of course, our special guest speaker, Ulrich Boser. Best regard to all participants who have joined us today, and we are very grateful for the enthusiasm of the participants. And I'm very pleased to announce that we have more than 1,000 participants registered to today's webinar, joining via Zoom and YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, Ministry of Finance Learning Week is a learner's fair to gain knowledge and learn directly from international experts, ranging from academics to practitioners in the field of learning and knowledge management. The Ministry of Finance Learning Week is a part of the Ministry of Finance Learning Festival, which is held to build learning culture and sharing knowledge in order to realizing the Ministry of Finance as a learning organization, as well as to welcome the 75th anniversary of the Ministry of Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, let us together sing the Indonesia National Anthem, Indonesia Raya. May all the audiences to stand up. Please be seated. Dear participants, to officially open this webinar, we are pleased to listen to the welcoming remarks by the Secretary of the Financial Education and Training Agency, Bapak Iqbal Islami.
Thank you, Pilar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable Chairman of Financial and Education Training Agency, Honorable Senior Officer from the Ministry of Finance, Honorable Speaker, Mr. Ulrich Boser, and Moderator, Ibu Esti Purwandiani Hidayati, distinguished participants from Ministry of Finance and other ministry and agency. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to you all. It is my pleasure to extend my warm welcome to you all to the Ministry of Finance Learning Week 2021. Ministry of Finance Learning Week is a half-day webinar for 5 days in a row. Every day, we bring eminent international speakers to share their knowledge and vast experiences focusing on organizational learning. After having wonderful speakers in the last 2 days, talking future learning and self-determined learning, today, in the 3rd day of the Ministry of Finance Learning Week, we are ready to embark on getting new insight on how all of us can be an effective learner. First of all, please allow me to extend my warm great gratitude to our today's speaker, Mr. Ulrich Boser, founder and CEO, Learning Agency in Washington, D.C., USA. Thank you for coming to our today webinar. Big thank you is also extended to our today moderator, Senior Advisor to the Secretary General of Ministry of Finance, Ibu Esti Purwandiani Hidayati. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, many organizations, public and private, including Ministry of Finance, believe that one strategy to make organizations keep agile and adapt with today's fast-changing world is to nurture learning within the organization, to implement and becoming a learning organization. Speaking of learning organization, we need to address one key element in learning organization, if not the most important one, for sure, is ourselves as a learner. Learner plays important role in effort of an organization to become learning organization. Individual learning should take place before organizational learning happen. As Nonaka said, organizational learning takes place when learning is transferred from the individual to the collective level in a dynamic process of interaction among different existing levels within the organization. Day 1 and 2 have enlightened us how various learning models are available and how our organization benefit by implementing those models. Today, we are going to learn how we as a learner can improve our learning skills. We are so fortunate to have a great speaker, Mr. Ulrich Boser. Hello, Ulrich. Good evening there. I know you are so busy with your project, the Learning Engineering Tools competition right now. Hope everything is going well. It is our privilege to have you with us today. I believe Ulrich will explain some of his idea from his best-selling books, Learning Better. I'm sure that we will get a very pleasant session with him and get some insight about how to improve our learning skill to become a better learner. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, please do take advantage our two-day session as much as possible. I believe the benefit of this event will be remarkable for us as a learner. And now it is time for me to end my speech. Have a pleasant webinar and thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bapak Iqbal Islami, for the welcoming remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the main event that we have been waiting for. But before we begin, let me introduce the moderator for today's webinar, Ibu Esti Purwandiani Hidayati. Ibu Esti Purwadiani Hidayati works at the Secretariat General of the Ministry of Finance Indonesia as the advisor to Secretary General for Apparatus Resource Affairs. She holds her doctoral degree of philosophy in applied economics from Victoria University, Australia. Her specializations are coaching, human capital development, international cooperation, policy research, and strategic management. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Ibu Esti Purwadiani Hidayati.
Okay, thank you for the lovely introduction, Mas Pilar. And a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu sekalian. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hope you are all well and healthy today. I am Esti, and I will be the moderator for this session. It is an honor for me to be here. And I would like to welcome our honorable guests and audience who have joined us today, either in this Zoom meeting or through our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu sekalian, today we are delighted to have another distinguished and prominent speaker in the learning area. Thank you for the Ministry of Finance Corporate University that has already invited great people to speak before us, so we can get many insight thinking that we can implement in our daily activity. And so before the presentation begins, I would like to introduce the speaker to all of you. He is not only a speaker, but also a CEO of a non-profit organization, an author, a researcher, reporter, and also an editor. He has also served as an advisor to many institutions, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Reboot Foundation, and the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign. Wow, he is truly a multi-talented person, guys. Okay, allow me to invite our special speaker, Mr. Ulrich Boser, who will deliver his talk titled, Learning How to Learn. Okay, hello Ulrich, good evening, how are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me, it's an honor.
Okay, I assume that it's already late in the US now, isn't it?
It is a little late here, but thrilled to be sharing the stage with such esteemed colleagues, and excited to hear more about the work that you're doing and hear a little bit and discuss a little bit more about the research on learning.
Okay. Okay, Uri, so we are so impatient to listen for your presentation. So it is a great honor for me to be a moderator for your session. You know that I've already read your book, Learn Better, and my impression is just like, wow, it's what I am looking for. It's so practical. So I think everybody that has already read the books can directly implement it in. So ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't read Ulrich's book, I think you should allocate some time to read it, as it's worth your time. And if you haven't read it, for the first step, I think we will listen to the Ulrich presentation first. Yeah. And so in a few more minutes, Ulrich will share his thought and experience about how we can actually learn better. And I believe it will be a fruitful session, and even now, I think you might have already lots of questions for him, and if you do, you can drop the question in the Zoom or YouTube chat box, or you can also directly raise your hand in the Zoom meeting in the discussion session later. So now, please get ready, sit relax, and pay full attention for the presentation. Okay, and the presentation will be run for around 45 minutes, and discussion will be held for around 30 minutes. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Ulrich Boser. Ulrich, the screen is yours, please.
Great, well, again, thank you so much for having me, and really thrilled at this opportunity. I wanted to start this talk by talking a little bit about something that's both simple and complicated, and that's driving. You know, I've been driving for a long time, started to drive when I was a teenager, I think since I started to learn how to drive, have probably driven 1,000,000 miles. And yet here's the catch that I find quite odd, is that I still have a lot to learn when it comes to driving. When it is snowing, as it does sometimes here in Washington, D.C., I'm not totally sure how to turn into the curves. Parallel parking is still difficult. And I bring this up because there's a fundamental tension here. You know, on one side, I have been driving every day for decades, and yet I'm still not a good driver. And it raises a bigger question about the nature of learning. I mean, how is it possible that we can do something day in and day out and yet still not get better at it? And it's not just me, and it's not just driving. For instance, I've been writing for a long time, learned to write when I was in elementary school. And in that case, my writing has actually gotten worse over time. And we see this in all sorts of areas, whether you're learning finance or learning a new language, that just doing something is different than learning. I think this is really important for the world that we live in today, because information, what we need to learn is always changing. And as such, we need to get better as learners in order to stay ahead of all those shifts. I first got interested in how we learn in a very personal way. I struggled as a learner growing up. I spent time in special education. I had to repeat grades in school, but over time had uncovered, at least on my own, some of these key skills of learning to learn. And then as I grew up in a professional career, really made my career around studying what does it take to learn effectively? What does the research say about how people should be effective learners? And one of the things that I found really surprising was that a lot of the evidence around learning is counterintuitive. In other words, it upends the typical ways in which we think learning is effective. So one thing that I often see people use are highlighters. And it turns out that there's very little research on highlighters. Another thing that I often hear people talk about is learning styles. That some people are visual learners and some people are auditory learners, but there's very little evidence on that. And yet there are practices like talking to yourself that honestly, if you do in a library or do in an office setting or even in a Zoom setting like this, that are highly effective. And yet if you hear someone talking to themselves, you yourself are going to say, there might be something wrong with them. So I wanted to take this talk and share what is important about learning, what are the skills of learning to learn, and talk about how you can apply them in your work in ways both that inspire your colleagues, but also allow you to be a more effective learner. The first thing I'm going to talk about is making meaning. And this is a really important aspect of learning to learn. And what's important about making meaning is that when we are learning, and especially learning today, we don't simply want to learn facts. We want to make meaning with those facts. We want to truly understand them. And so what does that mean, practically speaking, when we say, what does make meaning? And, there are a lot of ways in which you can make meaning yourself. And the one that I recommend the best is simply testing yourself, quizzing yourself. And there is a tremendous amount of research that shows that this type of learning in which you are quizzing yourself is a far more effective way to learn. In one study, they had a group of people, they just studied once. Another group of people who repeated study, right? They read it a second time. And then the third group engaged in quizzing, and they learned twice as much as the people who simply read something. And it's really the simple reason that you should quiz yourself, and that quizzing yourself makes meaning, right? It forces you to grapple with the fundamental ideas and make sure that you're not just memorizing facts. And this idea of making meaning isn't just important for employees, for people just doing the work, people trying to learn. It's also really effective for managers. So one thing that you can do when you're making meaning and you're sharing ideas with someone who works for you is to ask them to repeat the idea back to you. So ask them, can you repeat back what I've just told you in terms of your instructions? And these types of repeat backs are a very simple way to force other people to make meaning, to check for understanding. One of the things that I've found surprising about this type of making meaning is that it is a way of really drawing attention to the work. So I had the first experience of this type of making meaning when I was visiting a professor in Florida. And he asked me this question that said, what is the capital of Australia? And at the time, I thought that I knew the capital of Australia. And so I did say Sydney, and he said I was wrong. And I said Melbourne, he said I was wrong. And then finally, he told me the capital was Canberra. And I had this moment of pause where I thought, oh my gosh, wow, Canberra, I hadn't heard of the city or only vaguely. And he called it this hyper-correction effect. And when you know something, or at least you believe you know something to be true, and then you find out what you once believed and that's incorrect, you remember it a lot more. And this is another example of making meaning. And this is this idea that really sits within the literature and the research on learning. It also helps us understand why using highlighters is not a very effective way to learn, because what we often do when we use highlighters is just highlight every single word instead of taking the time to repeat the idea to ourselves, explain it to someone else, talk about it with a colleague. All these ways that push us to engage in more meaningful ways. So the second thing I want to talk about, and we're going to cover 10 of these big ideas around learning to learn in this talk, is the blessing and the curse of knowledge. Now I'm going to start this with a song and a little game that I often play with my children. And the game works something like this. I choose a song that I really like, but I can't tell them the name of the song. And so here, I'll give you an example. I like Elvis. Not sure how many of the people in the audience are familiar with Elvis, famous American singer. Maybe I'm sure some people have heard of him. And I would hum, And when you play these games with yourself, and you can even, take a moment to yourself during this Zoom to take a break and play this game with a family member. But when you hum to yourself, you really hear the song very, very clearly. But it is very hard for other people to guess that song. So, for instance, if you go around today and hum, Hound Dog, you will hear the song and you're familiar with the song. You'll hear it clearly in your own head. But it is very hard for other people to guess that song. And this is really the curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it is very hard to unknow it. And this is both a blessing and a curse when it comes to learning. On one side, it's a curse because we all use acronyms or use other shorthands for information because it's just very hard to unknow that type of information. I might say, oh, it's USA, but not realize that lots of people might not know what USA stands for. On the same side, knowledge, the previous knowledge that we have is really a blessing. It's really a blessing when it comes to learning, because the fact is that our previous knowledge is the best thing that predicts our future knowledge. So the best thing that helps us understand if you're going to become a good chemist is your previous knowledge of chemistry. The best thing that helps us understand if you're going to learn Spanish is your previous knowledge of Spanish. It's important to keep this in mind because I hear so many people saying, you know, because of cell phones like this one today, that we don't need to memorize facts anymore, that we don't need to memorize all these things that are on the internet that you can look up on Wikipedia or even just your multiplication tables. But the fact is that we still need to memorize facts, and it's because of this blessing and curse of knowledge. One example I might propose to you is, haben Sie heute Morgen gefrühstückt? That's German for, have you had breakfast this morning? Now you can look up each one of those words, of course, on the internet, on your phone, but you will not be able to speak German fluently unless you've really memorized those words. And this is really important when we're learning new topics, new ideas, that the more that we have that type of background knowledge, the better off that we are at learning. What does this mean practically for you as a learner? One thing is just if you want to get better at a topic, reading up on it is really helpful. So visiting Wikipedia or other websites where you can just refresh yourself on some ideas is really a great way to start to familiarize yourself with that topic. But when it comes to learning, you should also really keep in mind that learning can also be this curse. And when you're explaining a new idea to your boss or you're reminding yourself to other people, that you can get caught up in your own knowledge. And when you're caught up in your own knowledge, it's very hard to explain a new idea to someone else. That's our second big idea in learning. Let's move to our third, which is honor short-term memory. Now, many people will talk about what we can keep in short-term memory. And for a long time, people believed that we could keep more than 5 items in short-term memory. But it turns out that we can only keep 3 to 5 items in short-term memory. It's really not very much information at all. And this explains why it's very hard to memorize people's mobile numbers. This explains why important numbers in the US, 911 or other numbers that are used to call the police if there's an emergency are just 3 digits long. And why this is because human beings have a really hard time keeping things in short-term memory. Now, this is important when it comes to learning because just very simple distractions, listening to music, checking social media, can impede you from learning effectively. And people would be far more effective as learners if they made sure to keep those distractions from short-term memory aside. On the other side, what's important about long-term memory, the knowledge that we know, is that it allows us to work around short-term memory. And this is one of the things that's really effective about knowing something. It allows you to more easily short-circuit your short-term memory. So again, in this third lesson, honor short-term memory, make sure that you're protecting your focus when you're learning. The fourth thing that I wanted to talk about was thinking about thinking, or metacognition, as it's often known. Now, when I spoke at the beginning about, do you know how to drive? If you ask that question of, all of the people in Indonesia and say, do you know how to drive? And then, do you believe that you are a above average driver? In most cases, people would say that they are an above average driver. Similarly, if you ask people, are they better looking than average? Do they work harder than their colleagues on average? They'll say yes, but this is not possible, right? Not everyone can be above average. And this is an issue of overconfidence. People often believe that they know more than they actually do. And this is an important aspect of learning, because one of the aspects of really learning to learn is knowing what you need to know and then figuring out what you need to learn next. And metacognition, asking yourself these types of questions of, what do I need to know? Do I really know this? Could I explain this to someone else? Is really a crucial skill when it comes to learning, because that thinking about your thinking, knowing about your knowing, allows yourself to figure out, oh, here are the gaps in my learning. Here's what I need to learn next. I want to go to the fifth aspect of key skills when it comes to learning, and that is feedback. When it comes to learning, one way to really dramatically improve your learning is feedback. I found this out personally for a long time. When I was a young boy, I loved basketball. I stopped playing, and then as an adult started playing basketball again. And I played with some other older gentlemen such as myself. And, over a time when my wife and children were away, I decided to hire a tutor. And it was amazing to me, even after someone who's written about learning for so long, that my basketball dramatically improved. And why did it improve? It is because I got this tutor who gave me very personalized feedback. Feedback is really core to learning because it does a few things. One, it helps us make meaning, which we talked about at the beginning, is really important for learning. It also gives us instruction, so explaining ideas in a new way. So I would encourage you to, in your space at work with your colleagues, to encourage this type of feedback. So for instance, at the end of your one-on-one sessions, either with colleagues or with clients, just ask, can you give me some feedback? And you can even make this type of feedback required so that it's easier to do, to really make your organization a learning organization. Say, the next time I speak to you, I want you to give one piece of feedback on my performance. And ensure that I really take that feedback. And that way you can also lessen some of the dynamics around feedback. Very often people don't want to give feedback because they're embarrassed. They don't want to give feedback because it's uncomfortable. And if you require people to give you feedback, if you really push them to give you feedback, well, they're going to give you that feedback. And sometimes that feedback can be small. Sometimes that feedback can be large, but it's really helpful because it allows you to gain new insights that you couldn't gain on your own. The sixth thing that I wanted to talk about today was remembering to remember. That it is really important as a way to improve our learning to keep in mind that people will forget, and they forget at a very regular rate. One thing that surprised me when I started studying the research on learning was understanding how much people forget. So you've come to this talk today. I want to thank you again for joining us and for the individuals like Iqbal who helped pull this together. But the research suggests that you might forget as much as 50% of this talk. And that's just within 24 hours. Now, I'm thrilled to have you here, but it is also just shocking to think that people might forget so much of this new information. And so how do you push back against this type of inevitable forgetting? The fact that our brain is always forgetting. The first thing to keep in mind is that our brain is meant to forget. In fact, there's a fair amount of research that suggests that our brain is always forgetting. And in many ways, this is a great thing. If you forget your cell phone or the keys to your house, you don't want to remember where you left it 2 months ago. You want to remember where you left it today. And this is why this type of forgetting is so important, because it allows your brain to engage in the material more thoughtfully. Another way to think about this is that our brain never really forgets anything. And the evidence here is not conclusive, but there is a fair amount of evidence to suggest that people really never forget anything. But the brain is really a bit like your attic or your basement, where the information that you never use just gets pushed further and further into a back corner. And then it's only the information that you really need that's near the entrance to that basement is the information that's easy to access. So what does this mean, practically speaking, for learning? The first is that we need to account for this inevitable forgetting curve. This is important in topics where technical details and memory are going to be important. So if you're learning a new approach to accounting, or you're learning a new language, you're really going to want to account for this type of inevitable forgetting curve. And one way to do that is to spread your learning out over time as much as possible. So this is really important for managers who are trying to give new information to the people that they work with. So instead of explaining, for instance, the new software all on one day, you'd be much more effective on teaching a little bit on Monday, a little bit on Wednesday, and a little bit on Friday to allow for people to forget. And by re-remembering, they're going to hold that information in their mind for a lot longer. And similarly, if you are learning something for the first time, the more that you can spread your learning out over time is really the key to keeping that memory. Because the best way to fight against forgetting is to forget and re-remember. So if you wanted, for instance, to know that Canberra was the capital of Australia, just repeating it to yourself, this is the capital, this is the capital, this is the capital, is not an effective way to learn, because you're not allowing your brain these moments of forgetting and re-remembering. It'd be much better to wait until tomorrow to remind yourself, or the day after to remind yourself, because that's going to allow your brain these moments of forgetting and re-remembering. And this is so important for managers, because we often want to push as much information as we can on individuals. And really, we need to give a lot more space, give a lot more time for people to engage in materials, forget, and re-remember. I'm going to go to the 7th lesson, respect your emotions. So often we take emotions and we forget how important they are for learning. So I'm just going to play another quick little game here, and you should do this while you are engaged in this talk. And I call this the past game. So if you don't mind, take a moment to close your eyes and think about your childhood bedroom. Where did you keep your bed? Where did you keep your toys? What was the color of your room? And just, think about this for a moment. I'm going to have a sip of tea here while you think about this. Now, in studies, what they've found and if you could open your eyes again, what they found is that when people think into the past, they tend to lean back. So if you started thinking about your childhood bedroom and what was there, and you really engage in this, you'd start to lean back. And if you start to think about your future, so when you're going to retire, what's going to happen in 10 years, people tend to lean forward. And this is really a fascinating idea, because really it means that you started to think with your torso. Your body itself was doing the thinking. And this isn't, of course, how we usually think about thinking. We think it all happens in our brains, but our bodies, our emotions, they're really crucial for how we learn. And you can use this to learn more effectively. So one, when you're learning materials for the first time, you can use hand gestures and specific things to hang ideas off of your body parts in very specific ways. Second, it's really important to allow ourselves the time and emotion to allow ourselves to learn in more effective ways. And that means when people are very excited or they just came out from running around, they're going to have a more difficult time to learn. When it comes to learning, we really need quiet. We need these moments of peace because we want to make sure that we're connecting our feelings to our learning in effective ways. I'm going to go to message number 8, and that is gaining deep features. And oftentimes when I speak in these types of presentations, people are like, well, should I memorize materials? How do I really learn wisdom or richer forms of learning? And that's really what deep features is. Another way to think about deep features is it's really the underlying idea. So if you did a math problem where, as a young child, these types of word problems that many of us got, a boy goes to the store and he buys a sandwich for $5 and he buys candies for $7 or however much he spends, how much money did he spend? And really what you're trying to understand is this fundamental idea of 5 plus 7. The deep feature, the feature that you really want to know, of course, is 5 plus 7, the $12. But you can vary the surface features. And the more that you vary the surface features, right, and that is the story, the word problem, the boy who goes to the store and does he buy candy or does he buy a drink? These are these types of details that aren't really necessarily important. And when we're learning things for the first time, we really want to learn those deep features. What are the types of underlying ideas, wisdom that we can learn that are really going to help us learn in more effective ways? Let me give another example of this that I think will help you engage in this idea. And what I'll propose here is, let's say you want to learn to become a better piano player. And so on one day, would you be better just playing all your Mozart songs one day, all your Beethoven songs another day, and all your Bach songs on a third day? Or would you better off playing a little bit of Mozart, a little bit of Bach, a little bit of Beethoven, and then mixing it up in each practice session? The evidence is very clear that you're much better off mixing up your learning. So if you're trying to learn better about ways that you can be more effective at work, or you're just trying to improve your golf game, you shouldn't just practice putts all in one practice session. You should practice a little bit of putting, a little bit of drive, a little bit of sand shots, and mix up that learning. And the reason goes again back to this idea of gaining deep features. The more that we mix up our learning, the more that we allow ourselves to engage in all sorts of different ways, the more effective we're going to learn these deep features. And then number 9 here, uncover connections, is similar to this idea of deep features, but goes a little richer than that. And that is that underlying how we learn about learning, the way in which we really engage, is analogies. And that analogies are really crucial for us to learn. And I know analogies are often dismissed. We see them a lot on exams. They're often very, funny. But analogies really allow us to engage in richer ways, allow us to think about things in new ways. So if we wanted to come up with a new, company, one way is to use analogies, right? So, what is, McDonald's, but for shoes, and then you think about a large shoe company, or what is Uber, but for haircuts. What are different ways that we can use these analogies to understand ideas in new ways? And you can see analogies as being a really powerful way to learn topics in new ways. The final and 10th idea here is this idea of reflection, that when we are learning in new ways, that we really need moments of reflection to internalize new ideas. And so when you are giving a speech or thinking about asking questions, that it can often take 3 seconds or more for people to really engage in these types of ideas. My favorite example of this is Barack Obama, and we can disagree on whether or not he was a good president or not. But if you listen to him give speeches, and you don't even have to necessarily listen to him in English, he gives these very long pauses while he speaks. And because 3 seconds is a fairly long time, it can often feel uncomfortable for us to hear and feel these long pauses. But these long pauses really allow us to learn in more effective ways, because it allows us these moments to reflect. When I'm looking here at the Zoom, I see lots of exciting questions in the chat, so I might actually shorten this talk a little bit so we can get more to these questions. But a few things that I wanted to emphasize again, one was how important it is that we make meaning when we learn. And by that, I mean making sure that we quiz ourselves or quiz other people, far more effective ways to learn. How important it is that we use knowledge. It is the best predictor of future learning, as well as honoring our short-term memory, that third lesson. So important for us to lose focus, and that's really a skill that we need to keep in mind. Our fourth lesson was thinking about thinking, that when we ask ourselves, do we know something? Do we really know it? Are we overconfident? Are we underconfident? It's a fantastic way to learn. And that promoting feedback is another essential driver to learning, and that we can give feedback to ourselves. One way we can do that is watching videos, reflecting on what we've learned. But more importantly is talking to colleagues, talking to other people. They can really give us feedback. Lesson 6, remembering to remember. We forget so easily. You're probably going to forget a good chunk of this talk, and allowing yourself time to remember is important. Number 7, the social nature and emotional nature of learning is key and really central. And this is important because we live in groups, we talk in groups, we're incredibly social creatures, humans are. And so if we really want to present and create a learning culture, which I know is central to this learning festival, this learning week, we need to make sure that we're doing all the social and emotional aspects of respecting emotions, of engaging in that more social and emotional side of learning. So as managers, one of the best ways that you can encourage learning within your organization, within your team, is to model effective learning. And what does that mean? Taking the time to learn, showing people that you care about learning, right? And making that time an investment. Because what we know about learning, and especially effective learning, is that it takes struggle. That's the nature of making meaning. So when we think about this, respecting emotions, really make sure that you respect your own emotions and those of your colleagues. And then again, ultimately we want to learn not to learn our facts, but to create new connections, to make new ties. And so what I really encourage when you think about learning new ideas, to use analogies, that these types of analogies are very effective ways to gain new skills. So if you're thinking about learning about, war strategy, you can think about, World War II, speed played an important role. What does speed play a role in war now? What sort of role did it play in earlier wars? How is that different? But that's what allows you to learn in more effective ways. And then finally, this idea of reflection. How can we reflect on our own learning? How can we keep ourselves, allowing ourselves that space to dwell on what we've created, to really internalize it? Again, see these wonderful questions in the chat. So would love to move to those so we can have more of that dialogue, as well as engage in our own question and meaning making.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Uri, for the very insightful talk. And I found the points that interesting that I did summarize from your presentation. That we can learn better with your technique of learning that you just share with us just now. So there are 10 steps, 10 steps of learning, of the technique of learning. So if can I summarize it, that first we have to make a meaning of our learning, such as we have to quizzing ourselves what this kind of learning has a meaning for us. And then we also have to know the blessing and curse of the knowledge, how the previous knowledge help us to learn something easier. Yeah. And we have also to honor our short-term memory. So not very much information that we can keep in our short-term memory. So protecting your focus when you are learning, and thinking what you are thinking. People often think that they that they know more that they really know. So why, in fact, we need to know the gap of knowledge that we have. Yeah. And also, the next is feedback. I think the feedback allow us to we can improve with the feedback that we get. So from that feedback, we can learn something new, and that make us grow. We knew our weaknesses, so from there we can set our new goal, how to learn the new thing to address the weakness. Yeah. And we have to remember because it's natural to forget something. That's why we need to remember enemies. Yeah. And also we have to respect our emotions. So when we learn, we need to find the moment that is very suitable for us to learn, so we can learn something better. And also we have to gaining the future. And also we have to make use analogy to make us more engaged with something that we learn, and with also other information that we have already again before. And the last thing is we have to do the reflections. So we have to allocate some time to reflect on our learning journey, I think. Okay. I hope that what I've already summarized is not so biased from your idea in general. Okay, Uri, I think I think we should now move to the discussion session. because the time is running fast now. And I think for this discussion session, it's better if we give the chance for the audience in the Zoom meeting. It's okay with you? So they can ask you directly. It's
Well,
okay?
yes, the first thing I would say, Esti, was
Yes.
you did a wonderful job at making meaning. So you summarized the full speech, and so did a great example of learning to learn, because these types of summarizing is a wonderful way to make meaning, and I think also shows a good way of engaging this type of learning. And yes, I saw in the Zoom, and I myself was trying to keep my short-term memory focused on giving the speech, but I saw a lot of the questions in Zoom, and
It is.
would love to engage on those, because those are clearly pressing questions that I'd be happy to answer, rather than keep on going on things that I might find interesting. So yes, let us turn to those questions. Happy to help in any way that I can.
Okay, so maybe we just ask one or two audience to ask, and then we move on to the question in the chat box. It's okay, yeah. Okay, now who has already raised hand here? Okay. Sorry. Okay, now it's already there. Oh, sorry. Oh, udah Inoi. Okay, Udah, please introduce yourself and your office, and also please raise your question in brief. Thank you. Still mute, I think. Unmute, please.
Okay, thank you, Ibu, as a moderator. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ulrich. How's in Washington DC right now? It's almost 4 p.m. right now in the evening in DC.
It is a little late. I'm excited for your question. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Okay. According to your presentation, you said that in one of the research results, almost everybody, almost people, forget almost 50% in 24 hours. And what I want to know is, instead of try to remember by repeating one of the information, what do you think about anticipate or reduce the percentage of forget before the forget itself comes? What can we do? I think that's all my question, Mr. Ulrich.
It's a great question, because no matter what work that you do, whether it's in the Ministry of Finance or you want to remember the name of someone you meet on the street, this memory is very important, and yet we forget so regularly. The best way to improve, if you need to remember something, is to allow your brain time to forget that memory and then bring it back up again. So I mentioned this idea of a crowded basement or a closet, where you leave everything, or a desk. It's only if you continually pull something is the best way to allow your brain the time to forget and re-remember. And usually it takes a few times, and our brain is actually built to do this. You asked specifically about anticipation, right? So if you're going to think you might know it. And anticipation works well if there's going to be some surprise. So if you think you're going to meet someone and you think you're absolutely sure that his name is Joe, and it turns out that his name is Steve, then you will really remember, because you'll be making meaning, the first one. But it won't necessarily help as much with memory. The key thing about memory, and all our brains work like this, is that allow ourselves to forget and remember.
Remember.
Is that work for all kind of situation?
Well, the key, does it work for all kinds of situations? The key here is that it works for things that we are able to more easily measure. So there's possible that you have memories of what happened when you were 5 years old. That is a much more complicated memory, right? That's embedded in other things, and why you remembered one day when you were 5 years old, but why you don't remember the other day. But I'm happy to throw into the chat this forgetting curve, where they comes from the 19th century. A guy named Ebbinghaus, just tested people learning like Swahili, languages that they had never heard before, and they end up predicting very carefully, when they forget and when they don't forget. The other key thing is if you know something about it before. So if you can hang new information on information that you already know, also another very effective way. But when it comes to this new information, this is just simply how our brain works.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ulrich, for the answer.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, it's okay with you, Uda Enoy, with the, it's enough? I think, yeah, so we still have to repeat and recall something to remember, yeah. So we have to remember, because, yeah, I myself so always forget everything. Just the moment that I got a new information and just lost the next second. So maybe I have to implement what you say before. Yeah, so I have to remember the new information that we have. Okay, Ulrich, I think we can move to the second audience who wants to ask you a question. It's okay. There is Sharaki. Okay, Sharaki. Okay, please. Introduce your name and what office you are, and ask the question in brief. Thanks.
Thank you, Bu Eti, and thank you, Mr. Ulrich, for your amazing presentation. I'm Sharaki from the Director General of Budget Financing and Risk Management. I have 3 quick questions. Hopefully it's a quick questions for you. So I've been taking notes, and I think to compensate for my forgetfulness. So my first question is that you said that most drivers believe that they're better than average. I think it reminds me of the book written by Daniel Kahneman, is Thinking Fast and Slow. I think I'm pretty much convinced that you've also read it. So it's a form of cognitive bias, right? So how do we avoid that kind of thing, especially confirmation bias? I think it's a very prevalent problem nowadays. So my second question is about feedback. Feedback means we are ready to get some criticism, and most people are not really ready for that. Most people take it personally, just like me. So how could we diminish that, the emotional side of getting feedback? And the last question is using analogy. When we use analogy, I think it's a great way to highlight some features, but unfortunately, I think we also have to diminish the other features. For example, if we look a conversation as a war, I think in the English-speaking country, people see conversation as war. For example, we use phrases like, "Oh, I take a stand on my statement." We see it as a war, but we don't see conversation as something to build upon for us to collaborate. So the analogy of conversation as a war is a good one, but unfortunately, it's not complete enough. So I think there should be at least more than one analogy for us to comprehend better. What do you think about that? Thank you.
These are fantastic questions. So the first question is around, well, there are a number of questions even within the first questions, and just going to go through them a little bit stream of consciousness. So there is this book, and really a seminal book in behavioral economics, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And yes, certainly that idea, which is that people jump to conclusions. We have a mind that jumps to conclusions, and it's often very helpful, right? We need to jump to conclusions when we're driving, for instance, and in many other contexts that can be effective. And that we have a slower mind, and that slower mind can allow us to engage in more effective ways. So defeating these types of biases, really do come down to this system too. And this is why I emphasized a lot of reflection, that it allows us to engage in more effective ways. But as Kahneman argues, and certainly he's a lot smarter than I am, it is very hard to fight these types of biases. On the question of feedback, you asked, how do we make ourselves more open to feedback, and how do we engage in it? There are a number of reasons why people are averse to feedback. I mean, one is, even if we didn't get feedback from friends, if we just got a score, like when we were in school, you got a bad score on a test, maybe your math test, you would feel a little shame and embarrassment. And then the problem with feedback is that there's that shame, and it may come from people you admire. Your boss tells you something, or my wife tells me I don't clean up enough. These are things that you come from people also you care about. So it's doubly bad. I think the only solution is just to make it more normal. So with the people that I work with, I say often, you need to give me feedback. So I just hear more of it. And so it doesn't, it's not like just that one test and then you don't do well and you're like, oh, I'll never do well. But if you hear it a lot and it's little, it feels a lot more normal. And then, there are less stakes involved. The third point that you made about analogies is really a fascinating one. So there's a wonderful book by Douglas Hofstadter, where he really argues that for any thought that we have, it's really an analogy. And it gets into these very theoretical, kind of quirky areas. But the fundamental idea is, do you think a chair is the same that I think a chair is? And what happens if the chair only has 3 legs? Will you think that's a chair? Will I think that's a chair? And it really comes down to what we think is chairness. So that's a big philosophical debate, but at the end of the day, your point is a great one, which is analogies are not always great. They can lead us into mistakes. Sometimes people use analogies just because they're funny, is what many jokes are. But when we want to learn something new, specifically from a teacher, analogies allow us to engage in new ways and allow us to be more creative. And when we think about how we can become better at work, how we can deal with new ideas. So, how do you deal with email? Well, maybe you can start to, we all get many emails or many text messages. How do we look at how people have dealt with those in the past? They allow us to engage in new ways.
Okay, Hausaki, hope the answer from Uri fulfill your interest. And actually, your question is the question of all of us. So thank you for your question, because I think all of us has the same question as yours. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Uri. And now I think you can move to the question from the chat box. I think so many questions here. So I think the committee has already select some of them, and I think yes, I'll read them for you. Yeah. It is from Yuli Regis, from the Zoom meeting from the regional office of the Treasury. How to be effective learner when we have to learn something, but we are not into it because it's out of the passion. But we have to do it because we have a job in this institution. So, well, like that. So it is not our passion, but we have to learn this because we have a duty on that. Okay, please to answer it directly. Thanks.
So I think this is a wonderful question because it's a very honest question. And
Yes.
whether it's your job or taking care of children, or you have to learn something in your house, we often have to learn things that we don't really care about. We have a electrical issue that happened in our house, have to learn something new there.
Habis itu habis ya?
When you have to learn in this way, I mean, sometimes if it's really pressing, it can be more effective. But I think to very quickly answer the question that the individual asked, what is important are the same steps that we talked about otherwise, that you still want to make a meaning, you still want to respect your emotions, you still want to reflect. These steps of learning are not, they are all key to keeping this information and to applying this information to new areas. So what I would say is whether you care about the topic or not, these steps will allow you to become a more effective learner.
Yeah, thank you, Uri, for the answer. So actually, whether it is in our passion or not, as long as you have put a meaning on this learning goal, so it will be effectively, we will learn more efficiency and and can get great achievement as well. Yeah. Okay. I think we can now move from. We have only a little bit time more, so there's another one questions that we can talk here. Okay, the second one is from Khalid Ansari from Inspectorate General. Okay, hi, Mr. Boser. Tell us more about tips and tricks to handle the short-term memories. So how do we know the difference between STM effect and careless in a way of memorize things? Okay, thank you. And please to answer this.
Sure. So it's a great question, and that is, what are other tips and tricks to handle short-term memories and to make ourselves more effective learners? One thing that I would recommend is to go back to this idea that knowledge is a blessing, and anything you do to hang new knowledge off of old knowledge is very effective. And so one thing you can do is to create, and as actually this person did, right, an STM or short-term memory, right, having something stand for something else. Other thing that people have used over the years is what's called, and this dates back to the ancient Greeks, is a memory palace. So you can remember things by using a building or something else that you know well to hang your memories on those. So those are just two quick little tips and techniques that you can use to engage short-term memory and use more of your long-term memory to make sure that these ideas really stay with you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I hope that the answer from Ulrich can fulfill your question, Pak Khalid, ya. Okay, Ulrich, I think our time is also running out, and next is the last question and answer, and I think I'll give it back to the audience in the Zoom meeting. I think we can give to Charlita. Okay, Charlita, hello. How are you? Okay, Charlita. Okay, please introduce yourself and what office are you in now, and what's your question? Okay, please ask Ulrich directly. Thanks.
Good morning, sir. My name is Charlita. I'm from KPP Pratama Bali.
Oh, it's from Bali, ya? Tax Office Bali.
Director General Pajak, Sumatera Utara.
Sorry, Bali, sorry.
Yes, I would really like to know your insight on how to motivate myself to keep learning academic things, especially when it's not really something that I do daily on my job as a tax officer. I'm a working mom. Sometimes I find it really hard to get motivated, but I do really want to improve my knowledge in this skill, especially knowledge in the finance of money. So do you have any insight how to keep motivated? Thank you.
Great. Well, that was a helpful question. There was a little bit of noise, but I heard, two things. One is, how can you keep motivated? And then, what can you do in short amounts of time? One thing, and this goes back to this idea of system 1 and system 2, then individual brought up earlier, that if you don't want to do something, thinking to yourself, oh, I don't want to do it, can be a disincentive. So, just square away a little bit of time each day, 15 minutes to try and learn something new. And you can say to yourself, this is a small amount of time, 15 minutes is not much. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier, but breaking up learning into smaller chunks and mixing it up over a longer period of time, you'll be more efficient with your time. So let's say you want to learn more about the history of Australia or Europe or even Indonesia, listening to a podcast just for 10 minutes a day would be a great way to, I think it's easier to keep motivated because it's not like, oh, I'm going to have to read this 500-page book and, I'll never find the time. It's just little chunks. And those little chunks will also allow you to retain that information for longer.
Okay, Charita, it's okay with you? So yeah, I think you have to maybe just chew a little bit by little bit, so you just keep motivated because it's easier for us, for you to learn something new here. Okay, I hope it it will fulfill your questions. And thank you very much, Ulrich, for I think the time for the discussion session is already up, and now for the time being, is there any other maybe one or two tips and tricks or something that you want to share with us in for the session?
This has been really helpful. I put my email in the chat. If folks have other questions, happy to answer them. These are always, I think, important questions, and happy to help in any way that I can.
Oh, okay. So it's okay for you. Do you mind if maybe you can share maybe a link or email or something that they can directly send you a question by email?
Yes, of course. I'll put it in here right now.
So yeah, maybe we can ask for your email address and we can share it with the audience so they can fulfill their curiosity about your technique, yeah, to be to be an effective learner. Okay, and thank you very much for being with us and also for the inspiring talks that you share with us. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please give a big hand applause for to Uri once again. Thank you, Uri. Okay. Uri, I think before we end this session, I heard right now that you are running a competition called Learning Tools Competition. Maybe you could tell us more about this project. So I'm sure that the audience is very interested in these competitions. Okay, please, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we just finished this year's competition, but we will run another competition in 2020. The prize purse for this competition is $4 million US, and it is open to anyone, including individuals. So one person in the chat said, "Oh, I'm a working mom here," or here's how we would like ideas to help to learn. And this tools competition is a great way to learn and come up with ideas that would allow for ways to improve education, especially during the pandemic. So you can visit the website to learn more, and we'll be in touch as it comes closer to next year. But if you have ideas for new tools and technology, this would be a great place.
Okay, thank you for sharing with us about this competition. I hope the audience here is so curious enough and interested in participate in the competition. I hope one of us can win this competition. Okay, okay. Again, thank you very much, Uri, for being with us, and also for this inspiring talks. So I think I'm afraid that that's the end of our today's session with Uri, titled "Learning How to Learn." And it will be useful to be in mind that if we implement the new way of learning as taught by Uri, the 10 technique of learning, I'm sure that we can have a better way on learning and be an effective learning. So we can also achieve the result that will also be better. Okay, so again, thank you, Uri, for being with us today. And I would like to give the screen back to our MC, Mas Pilar. And now I would like to say goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, stay safe and healthy. Okay, back to you, Mas Pilar. Screen is yours.
Thank you, Bu Esti, for moderating today's session, and thank you very much, Ulrich, for your insightful presentation today. It was much appreciated. And also thank you for keeping us up to date with your tools competition. Wow, that is such a great prize, and I believe that many of us will interested to join the competition. Thank you again. And ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the final segment of our today's webinar. But before we close our webinar, I would like to invite the Director of General Financial Education and Training Center, Ibu Heni Kartikawati, to give her closing remarks. Bu Heni, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Mas Pilar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honorable senior officials from the Ministry of Finance and other ministries and agencies of Indonesia, Honorable Speaker, Mr. Ulrich Boser, and Moderator, Ibu Esti. All participants, Ibu Bapak sekalian yang berbahagia, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We have just invested a short time, yet meaningful, to discuss learning how to learn with Mr. Ulrich Boser. I believe that for the last 2 hours, all of us have obtained a fruitful session, a session that has given us a broader view of how each of us can improve our learning skills and become an efficient learner despite our age, outstanding memory, intelligent, etc. From the discussion, we have learned a lot that we need to believe to ourselves and find a strategy to learn. This is significant, I think, and in line with what the Secretary Agency has said in welcoming remark this morning, that mastering learning skills plays an important role to transform Ministry of Finance as a learning organization. Ulrich, thank you for sharing today. It's such an amazing session with you. You have enlightened us on how we can become an effective learner and what organizations need to facilitate for its learners. We also have gained lots of knowledge from you and how to motivate ourselves to learn. There were still lots of questions from the participants in the chat box, but unfortunately, there is too little time to address all of them. So hopefully there will be next time for us that we can learn more from you. Ladies and gentlemen, Ibu Bapak sekalian, we will have 2 more speakers to go tomorrow and Friday. And for tomorrow, we will have Martin Redmakers, and he will talk about corporate university. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with him, he is the author of the book Corporate University, Drivers of the Learning Organization. I'm sure it will be such an interesting topic, since in fact, quoting what Martin says in his book, the main challenge of organizations is to stay aligned with the rapidly changing outside world, especially right now in times of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Therefore, tomorrow we will learn from Martin on how corporate university can be the driver of learning organization and how it can help us as an organization to survive. That's all from me, and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to you, Mas Pilar.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Bu Heni, for the closing remarks, which also concludes today's webinar. To all participants who join us today, we would like to say thank you for your participation, and don't forget to give your feedback about this webinar by filling the evaluation form with the link that we shared in the chat box. See you again tomorrow on the Ministry of Finance Learning Week Day 4 with the theme Corporate University, the Driver of Learning Organization with Martin Redmakers. Stay safe and healthy. I'm Pilar Wirotama signing off. Good day. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.